In Star Wars The Force Awakens, Kylo Ren made a controversial unmasking that left people divided, but does it matter even if he did or not? Let's find out.
A friend of mine, Movies Remastered, worked on his own fan edit of the movie a decade ago, and one of his original ideas was to keep Kylo Ren's mask on when interrogating Rey. As a personal favor, MR's asked me if I can work with him on this. Since our last collaboration on the Wolverine video went so well, we knew we could pull off the mask VFX. So we had to push the envelope and thought it would be a great time to introduce cloth simulation in today's video. Also, please hit that like and subscribe button for more videos like this. Thanks everyone, I appreciate it. It seems other editors over the years have tried using a CGI helmet tracked within the scene, but as far as I can tell, they never actually finished a scene or even uploaded an update since of October of 2020. I first needed to study the source material and then try to mimic how it looks in the movies. I applied a cloth effect onto the hood model, but when you play the simulation, it just goes through everything. And since my only focus is on the head and shoulders, I turned both of these into what's called passive colliders. So now when you play the simulation again, instead of the hood clicking through, this time it's actually touching the surface and leaning up against it. Even though all of this is working, there's still the matter of it flying off and not being connected to the head or body. And here's how to fix that. I selected some vertices from the topology and then selected the full helmet model, connected them together by using the points to surface option. I also did the exact same process for the shoulders. What this does is, when the simulation plays again, not only do the physics start to simulate and collide with everything, but these points we made onto the surface makes the hood stick to these same areas. Now that my setup is done, I want to make some basic animations for the head and shoulders to see how the simulation works, and right now it's going all over the place. Let's fix that. Whenever you apply a cloth effect to anything, you get what's called a nucleus in the outliner. From there, I increased the values in my solver attributes tab. Then I went into the main cloth attribute tab and adjusted some of the values in there. And let's go ahead and play that. So after all of that, we now have something that just about works. Compared to how it looked beforehand, adjusting those values slightly makes a huge difference. Alright, I think we got our character asset ready to go. Obviously, we're working on the full sequence, but today I'm going to show you the 3 of the hardest shots we worked on so far. For this shot, I like how the camera's looking down on Rey with how Kylo is, but I think he's losing a lot of that confidence when his eyes just start drifting off. He can't make eye contact with her for some reason. MR's original thought was to lean into this and make Kylo Ren less intimidating, to show Rey that he wasn't the monster she thought he was, and to give him more of a softer side, and to show a contrast from the Poe interrogation scene earlier in the movie. But after we worked on some test shots of what it would look like, I strongly suggested the idea of taking the opposite approach and making it more intimidating, which ended up being the direction we went with. So I want to change that. There's a scene in Alien 3 where Ripley comes face to face with a xenomorph, and I want to recreate that moment with this. I went ahead and made my camera and object tracking in PF track. This came out really well, so I'm not too worried about it. Then I started bringing everything into Maya. I brought in my character asset and connected the hood and mask to the object track. But what's funny about this is, in order to get that same level of eye contact that I wanted, I had to completely ignore what the head and neck was originally and animated the whole thing into a new position. So if we play this, we now have something that looks different but more direct. But you're probably wondering, how are we going to get rid of all that original head movement from behind the CG mask and neck replacement? Here's what's tricky about this. I want to make a background matte painting to cover up his head and neck. I also had to make a 2D track with the scale and rotation properties turned on, but when I do this, the clean plate clips through the foreground. So I have to manually rotoscope all that back in. It's actually a relief that I don't have to be too accurate with this, since the color behind the outline of his arm and the scarf are still the same color as the matte painting I just made. After all that was done, I went ahead and brought in all of my renders as separate layers and started finishing up the compositing process. Okay, now for the second shot. Tracking it was literally no problem. I brought everything into Maya and started setting everything up, but now I have another problem. When you play any kind of simulation, notice how it just spontaneously just starts at the first frame. I can't just hide that out of frame, kind of like how I did the last one. When you have 3D animation that has some kind of physics taking place, you want to either add 50 or 100 frames before it actually starts, so that when the cloth simulates, it's given enough time for the physics to settle and enough frames to cut out the drop off. The lighting situation is really complicated because I want to go for that horror movie look and wasn't really planning on copying the lighting from the original scene, but that amount of freedom also gave us too many options. But then we run into another problem. I didn't realize when you prioritize the lighting for just the mask, the hood doesn't exactly look as good in comparison. So here's what I did next. I kept the same lighting I already made for the mask and then made another lighting scenario for just the hood. I rendered them out separately with their assigned lighting setups. Even though they don't share the same exposure, they do share the same perspective as to how I want this to look. But again, that left me with another problem, with these jittery pixels on the narrow outlines of the mask. To fix this, all I have to do is go into my render settings and increase the camera sampling. So now, if we look at this again, we fix that issue. Now there's the matter of finding a way to make her reflect in his visor. I used the rotobrush tool to make a separate layer for Rey and the chair, then brought that over as an image sequence because it's a quicker way to keep the transparent background. But I found myself over-engineering the idea and it didn't work at all. So, Movies Remastered suggested to just make a 2D track in After Effects, which actually worked perfectly. And after all of that, we now have something that just about works with the ideas we were going for. On this next shot, I'm using this thing called the auto track. What this does is it tracks everything automatically, but I'm having a lot of issues just making the camera track work. The reason why this is happening is because when the camera is panning away from all those details, I'm left with all this blurry depth of field. But I had an idea. I still have the first half of the shot tracked. All I have to do now is find a way to track the other half. I brought in what's called the user track, which gives me the freedom to manually track wherever I want. After another couple failed attempts, I still wasn't able to get the right camera track that I wanted, but the one that sort of came closest was my third attempt out of like 7. It's not as unstable like the others, so I decided to just work with this. Then after that, I started adjusting the camera track by reducing a lot of the original animation and replacing it with a few keyframes of my own to make the camera straighter in comparison. Finally, I was able to make my object tracks for both the head and the shoulders. After all that was done, if we go ahead and watch this again, we now have a much better looking camera track than what we had beforehand. After everything was rendered and ready to go, I went ahead and brought it all into After Effects and just started finishing it up from there. But when I turned up the brightness and zoomed in, I noticed some stray hair sticking out, and here's how I fixed it. My first idea was to make a 2D track from the background and then creating a matte painting to cover this up, but after connecting them together, that's where we have another problem. The tracking I made wasn't as stable as I thought it was, so I had the idea to rotoscope around each part of his whole body to mask him out completely. Then I used the content awareness field to generate a fill layer in all that empty space. Yes, I know it's a bit over the top, and yes, I know the clean play doesn't even look all that good, but I'm only focused on the top part of where his head is, and here's what I did next. I went back to the original footage and masked around the hair that was sticking out, then copied and pasted the same masking onto the generated fill layer. After that, I put the fill layer with the applied mask over the original footage. So if we go ahead and play this now, the hair that was sticking out before is no longer there. And once I comp all of that together, you get something that looks like this. Alright, I am done. This has been a really time-consuming but one of the most extremely interesting side experiments I've ever been part of. Let's roll it.
It's so lonely. So afraid to leave. At night, desperate to sleep. You imagine an ocean. I see it. I know you've seen that. And now you'll give it to me.
And here's what it looks like with a side-by-side comparison.
It's so lonely. So afraid to leave. At night, desperate to sleep. You imagine an ocean. I see it. And now you'll give it to me.
We're still in the process of finishing up the whole sequence for the full edit, so check out Movies Remastered's channel for more updates and Star Wars content. If you have any other VFX ideas or collabs in the future, leave them in the comment section below. Alright, that's it for me. Check out my other videos and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.